Chapter 6. Animal Magnetism, Hypnotism, and Laying on of Hands. All that has been said in reference to the cause of sleep, whether natural or induced by the processes of hypnotism, applies with equal pertinency to that induced by the processes of mesmerism or so-called animal magnetism. The obvious reason is that the immediate or efficient cause of sleep is the same in all cases, whatever may have been the visible means of inducing the histological conditions that cause or constitute sleep. The parallel between hypnotism proper and animal magnetism, so-called, practically ends here. Owing, however, to a defective terminology that has grown out of conflicting theories of causation, the distinction between mesmerism and hypnotism has been lost sight of by many writers. The practice growing out of this confusion of terms has also served to obliterate distinctions, so that many who call themselves hypnotists in reality employ mesmeric methods in whole or in part, and vice versa. It will first be necessary, therefore, to give the reader a clear understanding of what I regard as the true line of distinction, to the end that I may not be misunderstood when I undertake to make a practical application of the facts we have learned in previous chapters to the subject before us. Mesmerism and animal magnetism are terms that are frequently used interchangeably because they represent the same theory of causation. Hypnotism represents another, and a radically different, theory of causation, but both stand for methods of inducing sleep for experimental or therapeutical purposes. The differences, of course, are in the theories and in the practice under them. The mesmerists, or animal magnetists, induce sleep by processes varying in detail, but consisting essentially of coming into personal contact with the subject and concentrating the mind upon the work in hand. Contact is made, sometimes by the operator pressing the balls of his thumbs against those of the patient, sometimes by making passes over him, with or without contact with his person, but generally by gently touching him at various points, particularly on the head and face, and often by merely laying one hand upon the forehead of the subject and the other at the base of his brain. For the relief of local pain, the hand is pressed upon the part affected, or gentle contact passes are made over the same. But whatever the details may be in the process of manipulation, the essentials are personal contact and concentration of mind. The theory of Mesmer and his followers is that a health-giving fluid emanates from the operator and impinges upon the patient at whatever point the contact is made. This hypothetical fluid is the animal magnetism of which we hear so much and know so little. It is supposed, however, to be charged not only with health and vitality in a concrete form, but to invest its possessor with dominion over his fellows in love, war, politics, religion, and commerce. At least so say the current advertisements of those who have it for sale in the form of lessons at so much per lesson. To do the early mesmerists entire justice, they did not claim for the hypothetical fluid the wide range of power and usefulness that is now claimed by the charlatans into whose hands it has fallen. But their ideas were sufficiently extravagant to make it the vulnerable point in mesmerism. At least it was the point which science, as represented by the medical profession of the day, attacked with hysterical insistence, not to say insensate virulence. It was the weak point in the armor of mesmerism, because it could not be demonstrated, that is to say, the fluid could not be segregated, bottled, and analyzed. The therapeutic efficacy of the practice, however, could be demonstrated, but that fact apparently served but to increase the virulence of the attacks upon the fluidic theory. This view of the matter, however, can only be sustained by the presupposition that the average physician is violently prejudiced against any theory or system of practice that threatens to heal the sick without the use of drugs. Be this as it may, the fact remains that the medical profession waged incessant warfare against mesmerism, ostensibly because the fluidic theory was held, a priori, to be unsound and unscientific. In the meantime, the mesmerists fell naturally into the common fallacy of supposing that their success in practice was demonstrative of the soundness of their theory. Thus believing, they found no difficulty in identifying themselves with that numerous and highly respectable class known as martyrs to the cause of truth, and consequently hysteria entered as a factor in the controversy on the side of the mesmerists as well as on that of their opponents. And thus the controversy went on for many years. The mesmerists constantly gained ground because they could heal the sick, and their opponents as constantly lost ground because they were powerless to disprove the facts of mesmerism or its theory of causation. In the meantime, Braid, a Manchester physician of high standing and repute, became convinced of the genuineness of the mesmeric sleep and of its therapeutic value, but remained unconvinced of the scientific validity of the mesmeric theory of causation. In other words, he did not deem it incumbent upon him to deny the facts because he deemed the theory untenable, but, like a true scientist, he proceeded to institute a series of experiments to prove the one and to disprove the other. In this he partially succeeded. He confirmed the sleep together with its therapeutic potency, and he demonstrated the fact that the sleep could be induced without physical contact with the subject, by simply causing the latter to gaze steadily upon a bright object held slightly above the level of his eyes. This process of inducing sleep was designated by its discoverer as hypnotism, from the Greek radix hypnos, signifying sleep. Properly speaking, therefore, the word should be restricted accordingly, for it was coined, not to rechristen mesmerism, but to distinguish the Braidian process from that of mesmerism or animal magnetism. This distinction, however, was soon lost sight of by the successors of Braid, who held that his discovery had solved the whole problem of induced sleep and disproved the fluidic theory. Braid himself did not make so broad a claim, although he was as anxious as were his professional brethren to demonstrate the invalidity of that theory. He simply claimed to have discovered one method by which sleep can be induced without personal contact, and, consequently, independently of the hypothetical magnetic fluid. He expressly declared that his method was not identical with that of mesmerism, but he considered the condition of the nervous system induced by both modes to be analogous, both of which propositions are self-evident. He admitted that the higher phenomena of mesmerism could not be produced by his processes, for example, thought transference, etc., whereas by the mesmeric methods the phenomenon of thought reading or telepathy, as it is now generally termed, was very easily produced. It will thus be seen that there is a very clear line of distinction between mesmerism and hypnotism, as the latter was understood and practiced by its discoverer. The one required personal contact, and the other did not. By the methods of mesmerism, the higher phenomena could be produced with wonderful ease and certainty, whereas hypnotism, as practiced by its founder, was powerless in that direction. In the light of later developments, therefore, it is self-evident that the essential difference was primarily in the methods of inducing the sleep, and that, so far as Braid himself is concerned, he deliberately threw away all that was distinctively valuable and vital in mesmerism, labeled the rest hypnotism, and invited science to feast on the dry bones. He was not responsible, however, for the misinterpretation of his work that immediately followed, nor for the confusion consequent upon the misinterpretation. The vital point in which his work was misinterpreted consisted in the assumption, by the enemies of mesmerism, that Braid had disproved the fluidic theory. This led to a confusion in terminology, in that the word hypnotism came to be employed as a generic term, definitive of all methods of inducing sleep, so that, instead of distinguishing Braidism from mesmerism, it obliterated all distinctions. This, in turn, led to a deplorable mixing of methods, so that hypnotists were prone to employ mesmeric methods in conjunction with those of hypnotism proper. And mesmerists often employed the hypnotic process because of its greater facility in inducing sleep. The result was that mesmerists gradually lost the power to produce the higher phenomena which distinguished their performances when the old methods were exclusively employed. In the meantime, Braidism gradually gained a standing among the medical profession of continental Europe, and this eventually led to the formulation of the law of suggestion as applied to hypnotism. That is to say, it was discovered that persons in the hypnotic state are constantly amenable to control by the subtle power of suggestion, and the law was thus formulated by Liebold of Nancy. It has since been discovered, however, that the law not only applies to hypnotized persons, but that it is a general law of the subjective mind, without restriction as to particular states or conditions of the objective mind. Nevertheless, limited as it was supposed to be to the hypnotic state, it threw a flood of light upon the phenomena of both hypnotism and mesmerism. The result was that in a very short time there sprang up a school of hypnotism, Nancy, which taught that all that is mysterious about either hypnotism or mesmerism found a universal solvent in suggestion. This, of course, served to confuse the public mind still further as to methods, and to obliterate distinctions as to causation. Thus, the ultra-suggestionist held that all that was supposed to distinguish mesmerism from hypnotism was easily explicable by reference to suggestion, that physical contact was but a form of larvated suggestion, That passes served but the one purpose of inspiring confidence, having no therapeutic value beyond the suggestion embraced in the act. That digital manipulation of any kind owed its therapeutic efficiency solely to suggestion. And many went so far as to include all material remedies in the category of larvated suggestions. I have already pointed out the fallacy of this belief so far as material remedies are concerned. Elsewhere, I have pointed out the fact that Braid's experiments demonstrated that adults could be hypnotized by his methods when suggestion in any form was out of the question. And the records of mesmerism are overflowing with evidence of the fact that many of its most important phenomena are produced under circumstances that exclude oral suggestion or its equivalents as a factor in the case. For instance, the fact that some animals can be mesmerized and others hypnotized demonstrates the absence, in both cases, of either oral suggestion or any form of larvated suggestion that appeals to the intelligence of the subject. Moreover, the fact that young children can be successfully treated by mesmeric methods and not by the processes of hypnotism proper is demonstrative of the fact not only that oral suggestion or its equivalents does not enter as a factor in either case, but that the effects of mesmerism and of hypnotism are due to radically and essentially different proximate causes. Again, what is of equal or of greater interest and importance, it demonstrates the vastly wider range of usefulness of mesmerism over hypnotism. The questions, therefore, still remaining unanswered are 1. What are the points of essential difference in the practice of hypnotism and mesmerism? In answer to this, however, it may be safely assumed that, broadly speaking, physical contact is the one essential feature of mesmeric practice that distinguishes it from that of hypnotism. At least it is the only visible, tangible difference, and it is tacitly assumed to be the only difference by the enemies of mesmerism who have sought to show that physical contact is unnecessary. 2. The second question, then, is, what is the rationale of the therapeutic potency of physical contact? This question reintroduces the old problem of fluidic emanations, or the theory of animal magnetism, for thus far but 2 hypotheses have been advanced to account for the phenomena. One is the theory of suggestion, and the other is the theory of fluidic emanations. I purpose introducing another hypothesis, based upon the correlated facts of psychology and histology, which may be provisionally termed the psychohistological theory, or the theory of direct mental action upon the cells involved. I have shown that suggestion, in the ordinary sense of the term, cannot be invoked to account for the phenomena incident to personal contact, and as this will more fully appear as we proceed, I shall provisionally dismiss it as untenable. This leaves the fluidic theory alone to be discussed in connection with my own interpretation of the phenomena. This I shall undertake in the following chapter. In the meantime, I desire to impress upon the mind of the reader that no theory invoked to explain the results of personal contact with the patient in the practice of mesmerism can possess the slightest claim to validity if it is not also applicable to the innumerable cases recorded in history and handed down by tradition of healing by touch or the laying on of hands. For if there is a principle or law of nature underlying the phenomena as shown in mesmerism, it follows that all methods of healing in which physical contact is the essence of the process are governed by the same law. In order to give the reader a faint idea of its antiquity, its potency as a therapeutic agency, the wide range of its usefulness to mankind in the past, and its potentialities when the principle underlying it is once understood, I condense Ennemoser's historical sketch of healing by touch or the laying on of hands. The healing of the sick by touch and the laying on of hands, says that indefatigable historian of ancient methods of healing, is to be found among the earliest nations, among the Indians, the Egyptians, and especially among the Jews. In Egypt, sculptures have been found where one hand is represented on the stomach and the other on the back. To even the Chinese, according to the accounts of the early missionaries Athanasius Kircher, China Illustrata, healed sickness by the laying on of hands. In the Old Testament we find numerous examples, of which a few are selected. When Moses found his end approaching, he prayed for a worthy successor, and we find the following passage, Numbers 27, 18, 20, And the Lord said unto Moses, Take thee Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thine hand upon him. And thou shalt put some of thine honor upon him, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may be obedient. Another instance is to be found in the healing of the seemingly dead child by Elisha, who stretched himself 3 times upon the child, and called upon the Lord. The manner in which Elisha raised the dead son of the Shunammite woman is still more remarkable. He caused Gehazi to proceed before him to lay his staff upon the face of the dead child. This, however, proved to be of no avail, for reasons which will be stated in their proper place hereinafter. But when Elisha went up into the room, and laid himself upon the child, etc., and his hands upon the child's hands, so that the child's body became warm again, the child opened its eyes. The New Testament is particularly rich in examples of the efficacy of laying on of hands. Neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given thee by prophecy, with the laying on of the hands of the presbytery. Timothy 4:14 is a principal maxim of the apostles, for the practical use of their powers for the good of their brethren in Christ. In St. Mark we find 16:18, they shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. St. Paul was remarkable for his powers, and it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in, and prayed, and laid his hands on him, and healed him. Acts 28:8. And Ananias went his way, and entered into the house, and putting his hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord, even Jesus, that appeared unto thee in the way as thou earnest hath sent me, that thou mightest receive thy sight, and be filled with the Holy Ghost. And immediately there fell from his eyes as it had been scales, and he received sight. Acts 9:17-18. In St. Mark we find, and they brought young children to him, that he should touch them, and his disciples rebuked those that brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was much displeased, and said unto them, Suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of God. And he took them up in his arms, put his hands upon them, and blessed them. Mark 10:13-16. And they bring unto him one that was deaf, and had an impediment in his speech, and they beseech him to put his hand upon him. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spit, and touched his tongue. And, looking up to heaven, he sighed, and saith unto him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. Mark 7:32-35. Numerous other passages are found in the New Testament, all testifying to the wonderful therapeutic efficacy of laying on of hands. Some of them are clearly indicative of the superiority of that method over all other processes of mental healing. Thus, we are told that when Jesus visited his native village, he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. But Mark, in relating the circumstance, adds this significant statement, and he could there do no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk, and healed them. Mark 6:5. The true significance of this remark seems never to have been appreciated. It means that the unbelief of the people prevented him from healing them, autosuggestion, or performing any other wonderful work in their presence, except when he laid his hands upon them. Of this, however, we shall take occasion to speak more at length at the proper time. Resuming the thread of Ennemoser's summary, we find that St. Patrick, the Irish apostle, healed the blind by laying his hands upon them. St. Bernard is said to have restored 11 blind persons to sight, and 18 lame persons to the use of their limbs, in one day at Constance. At Cologne he healed 12 lame, caused 3 dumb persons to speak, and 10 who were deaf to hear. The miracles of S.S., Margaret, Catherine, Elizabeth, Hildegard, and especially the miraculous cures of the 2 holy martyrs, Cosmas and Damianus, belong to this class. Among others, they freed the Emperor Justinian from a sickness that was supposed to be incurable. St. Odelia embraced a leper who was shunned by all men, in her arms, warmed him, and restored him to health. Remarkable above all others are those cases where persons who were at the point of death have recovered by holy baptism or extreme unction. The Emperor Constantine is one of the most singular examples. Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, had the power of assuaging colic and affections of the spleen by laying the patients on their backs and passing his great toe over them. The Emperor Vespasian cured nervous affections, lameness, and blindness solely by the laying on of his hands, Sulin, Vita Vespas. According to Coelius Spartianus, Hadrian cured those afflicted with dropsy by touching them with the points of his fingers, and himself recovered from a violent fever by similar treatment. King Olaf healed Ejo on the spot by merely laying his hands upon him and singing Proverbs, Edda, page 216. The kings of England and France cured diseases of the throat by touch. It is said that the pious Edward the Confessor, and in France that Philip I, were the first who possessed the power. The formula used on such occasions was le roi te touché, alles et guérisses, so that the word was connected with the act of touching, physical contact. In England the disease was called the king's evil, and in France the power was retained until within the memory of men now living. Among the German princes this curative power was ascribed to the counts of Habsburg, and they were also able to cure stammering by a kiss. Pliny says, there are men whose whole bodies are possessed of medicinal properties, as the Marsi, the Silai, and others, who cure the bite of serpents merely by the touch. In later times the Salmadors and Insalmadors of Spain became very celebrated, who healed almost all diseases by prayer, laying on of hands, and by the breath. In Ireland, Valentine Greatrakes cured at first kings evil by laying on of hands, later, fever, wounds, tumors, gout, and at length all diseases. In the 17th century the gardener Lavret and the notorious Streeper performed cures in London by stroking with the hand. In a similar manner cures were performed by Michael Medina, and the child of Salamanca, also Marcellus Empiricus Sprengel, Gesch. Dermed, Part 2, page 179. Richter, an innkeeper at Royan, in Silesia, cured, in the years 181–718, many thousands of sick persons in the open fields, by touching them with his hands. Under the popes, laying on of the hands was called chirothecy. Diepenbroek wrote 2 treatises on it, and, according to Lampe, 34 chirothetists were declared to be holy. The foregoing comprise but a small part of the recorded instances illustrating the efficacy of healing by touch, or laying on of hands, as practiced in all the ages. But enough has been said to show that the process is something apart from suggestion in the ordinary sense of the term. It is neither oral suggestion nor any of its equivalents. It is not larvated suggestion, for that implies an element of deception. Nor is it mental suggestion in the telepathic sense, that is, thought transference at a distance or without personal contact with the patient. All these forms of suggestion are now well known to those who practice suggestive therapeutics, and constant efforts have been made to correlate the facts of mesmerism with one or another of these forms of suggestion. But practical mesmerists well know that there are phenomena arising from personal contact with the patient that refuse to range themselves under either of the known forms of suggestion. Hence the strength and pertinacity with which they have held to the fluidic theory, the theory of animal magnetism. To do them entire justice, it must be said that there is much to sustain the fluidic theory, especially in the absence of any means of disproving it, or of any more rational substitute. In the first place, it was formulated long before the potency of mental action upon the bodily functions was more than faintly recognized. Secondly, the phenomena attending personal contact with the patient seem to present some analogies to those of magnetic attraction and repulsion. Thirdly, those who opposed the magnetic theory offered no valid reason for so doing beyond the a priori assertion that it was contrary to the nature of things, a very dangerous weapon, by the way, for a logician to handle in the absence of proof that he is thoroughly acquainted with the nature of things. Fourthly, when, at length, a substitute was offered in the newly discovered law of suggestion, it was found not to possess the essentials of a valid working hypothesis for mesmerism, for that it did not account for all the facts. They had, therefore, a logical right to reject it, provisionally at least, whatever may be said of their own logical attitude in seeking to account for the unknown by referring it to something still more unknown. Be that as it may, they have the right to demand a substitute for their own theory which will at least render the latter unnecessary. It is my purpose in the ensuing chapters to offer such a substitute. Not, I hasten to say, one that will eliminate suggestion as a factor in any method of mental healing, for that is obviously impossible if suggestion is a universal law of mental medicine, but one that will reveal a form of suggestion, hitherto unrecognized, that is more direct and potent in its effects than any other form known to science.